Hello everybody, I am Mrs. Poppet and this is my place. If you're back again, well, I'm so glad to see you, and if this is your first time, you are always welcome. I love to share story time with all of you. Today we're going to start a three-part story. It's called The Little Mermaid. I know you probably heard of this before, but this one's a little bit different. But it's the same sweet story, so I think you'll like it very much. Let's begin. The Little Mermaid. Far out in the ocean, where the water is blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. So deep, indeed, that no cable could fathom it. Many church steeples piled upon each other would not reach the bottom beneath it to the surface of the water above. There dwelt the Sea King and all his subjects. We must not imagine that there is only yellow sand below the sea. No, indeed. The most singular flowers and plants grow there, the leaves and stems of which are so pliant the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they were alive. Fishes both large and small glide between the branches as birds fly among the trees up here on land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. Its walls are built of coral, and long Gothic windows are of the clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as water goes over them. Their appearance is very beautiful, for inside each lies a glittering pearl, which would be fit for the crown of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years. His aged mother kept house for him. She was a very wise woman, and exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others of high rank were only allowed to wear 6. She was, however, deserving of great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her granddaughters. There were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of all. Her skin was clear and delicate as a rose leaf, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea, but like all the others she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish tail. All day long they played in the great hall of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and fish swam in, just as swallows fly into our house when we open the windows, excepting that the fish swam up to the princesses and ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked by them. Outside the castle there was a beautiful garden, in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers, and blossoms like flames of fire. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was the finest sand, but blue as the flame of a burning sulphur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if it were surrounded by the air from above, through which the blue sky shone instead of the dark depths of the deep sea. In calm weather, the sun could be seen looking like a purple flower, with the light streaming from its cup. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden, where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flowers in the form of a whale. Another thought it better to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid. But that of the youngest was round like the sun, and contained flowers as red as the rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, and while her sisters would be delighted with the wonderful things they obtained from the wrecks of vessels, she cared nothing for anything but her pretty red flowers, like the sun, and for a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy, carved out of pure white stone, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. She planted by the statue a rose-colored weeping willow. It grew splendidly and very soon hung its fresh branches over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The shadow had a violet tint and waved to and fro like the branches. It seemed as if the crown of the tree and the root were at play and trying to kiss each other. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of ships and towns and the people and the animals. To her it seemed more wonderful and beautiful to hear of the flowers of the land, as they had fragrance, and not those below the sea, for they didn't. That the trees of the forest should be green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly. That was quite a pleasure to hear them. Her grandmother called the little birds fishes, or she would not have understood her, for she had never seen birds. "When you have reached your 15th birthday," said the grandmother, "you will have permission to rise up out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while great ships are sailing by, and you will see both forests and towns." In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15, but each year was a year younger than the other, and the youngest would have to wait 5 years before it was her turn, and she could rise up to the surface above the ocean. However, each promised to tell the others what they saw on her first visit and what she thought was the most beautiful. For their grandmother could not tell them enough. There were so many things on which they wanted information. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest. She had the longest time to wait, and she was quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window looking up through the dark blue water and watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and the stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew it was either a whale swimming over her head or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. As soon as the eldest was 15, she was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to talk about. But the most beautiful, she said, was to lie in the moonlight on a sandbank in the quiet sea near the coast, and to gaze upon the large town nearby, where the lights were twinkling like hundreds of stars, to listen to the sounds of the music, the noise of carriages, and the voices of human beings, and then to hear merry bells peal out from church steeples. And because she could not go near all those wonderful things, she longed for them more than ever. Oh, did not the younger sister listen eagerly to all these descriptions? And afterward, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city, well, with all its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of the church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and swim where she pleased. She rose up just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold, while violet and rose-colored clouds, which she could not describe, floated over her. And still more rapidly than the clouds flew a large flock of wild swans towards the rapidly setting sun, looking like a white veil across the sea. She also swam towards the sun, but it sunk into the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds into the sea. The third sister's turn followed. She was the boldest of them all. She swam up a broad river that emptied itself into the sea. On the banks she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines. Palaces, castles peeped out from amid the proud trees of the forest. She heard the birds singing, and the rays of the sun were so powerful she was obliged often to dive down under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek she found a whole troop of little human children, quite naked, and sporting about in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in great fright. And then a little black animal came to the water. It was a dog, but she did not know that, for she had never seen one before. This animal barked at her so terribly that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. But she said she should never forget the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty little children who could swim in the water, although they did not have fish tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but she said it was quite as beautiful there as nearer the land. She could see for many miles, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such a great distance that they looked like seagulls. The dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils till it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what the others had not seen the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and the large icebergs were floating about, each like a pearl, she said, but larger and loftier than the churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes, and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself upon one of the largest, and let the wind play with her long hair, and she remarked that all the ships sailed by rapidly, and steered far away as they could from the iceberg, as if they were afraid of it. Towards evening the sun went down, dark clouds covered the sky, the thunder rolled and lightning flashed, and the red light glowed on the icebergs as they rocked and tossed in the heaving sea. On all the ships the sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while she sat calmly on the floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning as it darted forks, flashed across the sea. When the first sister's permission to rise to the surface, they were each delighted with the new and beautiful sights they saw. But now, as grown-up girls, they could go whenever they pleased, and they had become indifferent about it. They wished themselves back again in the water, and after a month had passed, they said it was much more beautiful down below, and pleasanter to be at home. Yet often in the evening hours the 5 sisters would twine their arms around each other and rise to the surface in a row. They had more beautiful voices than any human being dared, and before the approach of a storm, when they expected a ship would be lost, they swam before the vessel and sang sweetly of the delights to be found in the depths of the sea, and begging for the sailors not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song. They took it for the howling of the storm, and these things were never to be beautiful for them, for if the ship sank, the men were drowned, and their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose arm in arm, the water in this way, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry. Not only that the mermaids have no tears, therefore they suffer more. "Oh, I were but 15 years old," said she. "I know that I shall love the world up there, and all the people who live in it." At last she reached her 15th year. "Well, now, you are grown up," said the old dowager, her grandmother, "so you must let me adorn you like your other sisters." And she placed a wreath of white lilies in her hair, and every flower leaf was half a pearl. Then the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur, and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers of her own garden would have suited her much better, but she could not help herself, so she said, "Farewell," and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set, and she raised her head above the waves. but the clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, the air was mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts had laid becalmed on the water with only 1 sail set, for not a breeze stifled, and the sailors sat idle on the deck or among the rigging. There was music and song on board, and as darkness came on, 100 colorful lanterns were lighted, as if flags of all nations waved in the air. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then the waves lifted her up, and she could look through the clear glass to the window panes and see a number of well-dressed people within. Among them was a young prince, the most beautiful of them all. With large black eyes, he was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being kept with much rejoicing. The sailors were dancing on the deck, but when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the air, making it as bright as day. The little mermaid was so startled that she dived under the water, and when she again stretched out her head, it appeared as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurred fire about, splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, even the smallest rope, could be seen plainly and distinctly. And how handsome the young prince looked as he pressed the hands of all present and smiled at them, while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns had extinguished, no more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon had ceased firing. But the sea had become restless. Moaning and grumbling sounds could be heard beneath the waves. Still the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down in the water, which enabled her to look in. After a while the sails were quickly unfurled, and the noble ship continued her passage. But soon the waves rose higher, and heavy clouds darkened the sky. Lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more the sails were reefed, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose in mountains high, as if they would have topped the mast, but the ship dived like a swan beneath them, and then rose on their lofty foaming crests. To the little mermaid this appeared pleasant sport, but not to the sailors. At length the ship groaned and creaked. Thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as it broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed, and the ship lay over on its side. The water rushed in. Well, that's it for today. That's part 1. It's so exciting, isn't it? I'll bet you can't wait for part 2 tomorrow. I know I can't. Anyway, I will see you then, and we will have another wonderful piece of this story tomorrow. Bye for now.